Grace family, this is Reverend Rachel with another meditation for this week. I'm sitting outside, hopefully you can see it behind me with our new beehive, and I doubt you can see this, but one of our bees is just going in through the opening. We got them settled on Sunday after church. And it's really fun to learn from them and watch them work. So I thought I would come out and sit near them for our meditation this week as I'm getting used to them and I'm beginning to learn a new language from them, a language which probably no surprise to speak of it in this way, but is another language that God uses to communicate to all of us about grace and love and rootedness in God's own self. Probably no surprise to hear that, given the conversations we've had over the past month now of Celtic spirituality and Celtic Christianity. So jumping right into that, along those lines, I thought today we would do, since it's so beautiful out and all of the snow is finally off the ground after this weekend's snowstorm, I thought I would do a walking meditation and spend a little bit more time thinking about, praying about, and inviting you to join me in that way that we can learn from all that is created, which, as we've seen, is beautifully held up by the Celtic Christian community, but definitely a common thread throughout Christian practice for the last 2,000 years. So I have a couple reflections. The first I'll share to you is from a book called Loving Creation, and this is not particularly Celtic. The author, Kathleen Fisher, writes about the environmental crisis that we find ourselves in and frames the crisis as an experience of faith, an experience of grief, an experience of loss, and she looks at the entirety of Christianity through the lens of this reality that we find ourselves in now. I highly commend this book to you, Loving Creation. I would say this is one of the most foundational books that I use, particularly when I'm stuck on a sermon or thinking about some difficult piece of theology that I just am having a hard time understanding. Her examples and the way that she weaves her theology through the natural world, through ecological principles, I've found it to be very inspiring. So that's Loving Creation by Kathleen Fisher. So I'll just read a brief passage which will guide into this walking meditation, and then I'll probably, if it still feels appropriate, but I'll just see how the Spirit leads, probably close with a prayer from John Philip Newell's, a familiar voice to us now, John Philip Newell's Book of Creation. So, starting with Kathleen Fisher, Loving Creation. So this is a chapter that she's titled When Grief Gives Way to Hope. And she's talking about her own process of grieving the state of this world in terms of the environmental collapse that we're experiencing, and how she finds Christian hope through that. So this is Kathleen Fisher. Hope in the power of small actions also arises from the interrelatedness of the world's problems. It is in an interconnected universe, social and environmental issues are knit so tightly into one system that following any concern takes us full circle. Globalization feeds consumption. Consumption increases the use of carbon fuels. Carbon fuels contribute to climate change, which in turn becomes a factor in global justice and injustice. An exercise that can be done in small faith communities or during workshops and retreats shows how these connections actually intensify the positive significance of individual action. And she then takes a moment to describe an exercise that she did with a group, but then she jumps on in, and I'd like to continue reading from her just a couple more sentences. At our present crossroads, when the future of our planet truly is at stake, we can act with assurance that our contributions are important. Reliance on the power of small actions to provide a way out of fear and hopelessness was one of the great gifts of the 19th century Carmelite, Therese of Lisieux. The circumstances of her life could have left her in a state of despair. One of 9 children, of whom only 5 survived, Therese lost her mother a few months after her birth. She herself died of tuberculosis when she was only 24. But Therese had a deep conviction that small actions done with love change everything. Every act of love somehow strengthens the universe, and every act of hatred weakens it. Hope is born when we imagine together. In fact, hope cannot be achieved alone. Rather, it is an act of collaboration or mutuality. So why would I read a passage about small actions done with love and interconnectedness as a preface to a walking meditation? Well, for me, not only the environmental reality, but this present reality that we find ourselves in of COVID-19 has left me some days feeling hopeless and feeling like I'm not really sure what there is that I can do. I'm not going to create a vaccine. I could probably sew masks, and a couple unfortunate people would receive some pieces of fabric that might hang together for a couple days. I can pray. And I do. But amid all of this, the words that Kathleen Fisher brings to us from Saint Therese of Lisieux really sat in my heart as these small actions done with love, and have encouraged me to imagine how even by taking a step, and then by taking another step, if I am opening my heart to God, if I am rooting myself in those actions as a practice, I'm building in myself and in this universe that reality of love and divine presence that, as Kathleen Fisher says, will somehow strengthen the universe. And I have to believe that's true. So I'll just walk through, with that in mind, I'll just walk through a brief framing for a walking meditation. And like with these other meditations, this is about your relationship with God. This is about centering your own self in the heart of the cosmos, which is Christ. So I invite you to play with this, to try it on, and if there are parts that work for you, great, and if there are parts that don't, then just leave them, and trust that the Spirit is inviting you where you need to be. So a friend of mine who lives in Thetford, Vermont, talked to me about this walking practice, and he said it's a way of centering your body in itself and centering yourself in Christ. And the way you do that is by slowing yourself down and really moving with intention. So many of us, when we walk, we kind of slap our feet down, and we'll often go heel to toe, just kind of slapping our feet down and not really paying attention to where we walk. Well, he invited me and a group of others, we were all on pilgrimage together on the Connecticut River, to really feel each muscle and really pay attention to where we were going to put our foot down, and to move from our toes to our heels very slowly, very intentionally, and to practice that muscle movement as a way of rooting ourselves in Christ. So I'm going to do that. And I have on probably the biggest, clunkiest clown shoes, so you might not be able to see what my feet are doing, but I hope, just offer that this pattern of toes to heel, you'll just have to trust a little bit that that's what I'm trying. So I'll just do that in silence with our bees in the background, and then I'll come back and I probably will close with a prayer from John Philip Newell's Book of Creation. So I'll just take a moment after I stand. I'll just take a moment, and there's a fuel truck that's about to go by, so that'll be exciting background for this. Take a moment of quiet, and then I'll start to walk slowly, feeling my muscles and centering myself in my body and in the earth in a small act of love.